Mohsin, you need to be buying Bitcoin.
Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Bitcoin's going to zero, man.
No, it's not. If you had bought it 10 years ago, $100, guess how much you'd have made?
10 grand?
$41,000.
Really? If my grandma had wheels, she'd be a bike.
Look, folks, this has been a debate that's been raging between not just me and Mohsin and his grandma with 3 wheels, but also the entire world. Bitcoin's one of those things in life where either you love it or you hate it. Like it or not, Bitcoin's impact in a short amount of time has been extraordinary, and it deserves a closer look, especially with all of the claims and promises being bandied around from Muslim Bitcoiners, how it's the purest form of money since the time of the Prophet. So in this video, we're going to first explain what Bitcoin is, whether it's halal, and then we're going to give you the case for Bitcoin and against Bitcoin, and give you all the information you need to make your own mind up. For those of you who are new to this channel, I'm Ibrahim.
And I'm Mohsin, and since 2015, we've helped millions of Muslims with their personal finances and investing. We run an investment firm called Curate Capital.
And we've written a best-selling book and hold qualifications in Islamic law, investment management, and corporate law.
We'd also love for you to click on that subscribe button and help us reach 300k this summer. Right, let's begin. So what even is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency created in 2009, inspired by a white paper by a man who goes by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody knows who he is, that's just his pseudonym. The central idea behind Bitcoin is that other currencies are too prone to being manipulated by governments and banks, and that the world needs a decentralized payment method that can't be manipulated. When we say decentralized, all that means is that there's no person, company, or government in charge of that currency. So you see, with normal money, like pounds or dollars, the central bank can print more whenever it wants, and banks act as middlemen every time you send or receive money. But with Bitcoin, it's different. It runs on something called blockchain, and it's a kind of public online record where every transaction is logged and verified by thousands of computers called nodes, and they can't be changed or faked. No single person can control it, not even the person who created it. That's the whole point. It belongs to everyone, and it works on maths, code, and consensus instead of trust in banks or government, as we currently have in our system. Think of it like how Muslims have preserved the Quran. There isn't a single master copy locked in a box somewhere. Instead, millions of people around the world have memorized it exactly, word for word. And if somebody makes a mistake at any given point whilst reciting it or writing it, others can immediately correct them. And that's because the system doesn't rely on one actor. It relies on a trusted network of people who keep it accurate. That's why many people think that Bitcoin is the future of money, especially in places where regular currencies don't work so well, like in Venezuela, for example, where inflation is out of control, or in Lebanon, where banks have frozen people's savings, or across parts of Africa, where sending money to family means paying huge fees and waiting days for it to arrive.
Okay, so that makes sense, but is it even halal? So, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency have a difference of opinion over them, like many things in Islamic scholarship. The vast majority of the people that we have spoken to who are knowledgeable Islamic scholars about this particular issue deem it to be permissible. And this includes people like Mufti Faraz Adam and other Islamic finance scholars. In our view, we see Bitcoin as another kind of digital asset, or if it is actively being used as currency, as another kind of a currency. And in both of those scenarios, it is perfectly permissible. It's just like any other asset, and it can be bought and sold on that basis. We have included a link to the fatwa and a detailed analysis and a comparison between the various different Islamic scholars that we did in an article, and we've linked that in the description below so you can check that out.
Is Bitcoin a good form of payment? Bitcoin started out as a decentralized payment system, but that vision has objectively failed. Hardly anyone now uses Bitcoin as a currency, not for everyday transactions at least, not even for illegal activity. Most of that has actually moved to other cryptocurrencies that are faster and cheaper to transact with. And because Bitcoin isn't widely accepted as payment, you're always going to need to off-ramp into fiat. So even the idea that governments can't take your Bitcoin falls apart, because you'll always need to convert that Bitcoin into normal money in order to be able to use it in real life. And the moment that you do that, you're back in the normal financial system. Sure, there are a few niche applications, but let's be honest, if it hasn't gained traction as a mainstream payment method in over a decade, it probably never will.
I think it's fine if Bitcoin doesn't replace all day-to-day payments. The key aspect of its design was ultimately to be censorship-resistant money, a permissionless system outside of state control. And in that mission, it has succeeded perfectly. You can send millions across borders in minutes without relying on banks or governments or the existing payment rails for the first time. Yes, Bitcoin transactions can be a little bit slower, they can be more costly during network congestion, but that's a trade-off for security and decentralization and transparency. People may not understand the value of what I'm saying, but historically it has never been possible, if you wanted to send money to Guatemala, to do that in a completely private and undetected way. And many people have perfectly legal reasons for wanting to do that. But these days, it just isn't possible until crypto came along. And for smaller and everyday transactions, there are now solutions such as Bitcoin Lightning Network, which enables near instant payments with negligible fees, and that's being developed very rapidly. And in fact, it's already being used in countries like El Salvador. So even if Bitcoin isn't widely accepted yet, payment adoption is growing. And residents of countries with unstable currencies or capital controls are seeing real utility in Bitcoin. It may not be the most mainstream of the payment methods today, but it's far from dead as a form of payment. And I think about it myself, where you're trying to pay someone in a country like Pakistan or other countries where there's restrictions around it. Bitcoin is a lifeline to those currencies to keep things ticking over. Another really practical example of where the payment system has failed Muslims is transferring money to charities and transferring money to certain locations globally that are seen as high-risk locations. Many Islamic charities have been debanked from the conventional financial system because the banks don't have the risk appetite to be able to deal with them. Other charities have their money confiscated or blocked, or it's sent back, because every US dollar transaction that you make, it goes via the USA. It goes via some clearinghouse in the middle in the USA that approves or rejects that transaction. And so the USA basically sees all of these US dollar transactions. It might be for a variety of reasons that you may not necessarily want that to happen. So charities are very excited about the rise of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, because for the first time it allows them to sidestep a lot of the archaic, historic, anti-Muslim, let's be honest, financial systems that were holding back charities being able to do important work on the ground in certain countries.
Is Bitcoin a good store of value? So, if Bitcoin has failed as a form of payment, maybe it still has some value as a digital asset. And that's fine. I'm not saying Bitcoin is worthless just because it's not useful day to day. An asset is whatever society believes has value. But if we're going to treat Bitcoin as digital gold, then we need to analyze it through that lens. First, Bitcoin isn't physical. If your store of value depends on access to the internet, what happens when the internet is taken away? In a true crisis, when governments cut off networks or infrastructure goes down, your Bitcoin is basically useless. Gold, on the other hand, doesn't need a Wi-Fi connection. Secondly, Bitcoin hasn't even stood the test of time. Its price seems to be propped up by belief and hype more than anything. The usual justifications, limited supply, decentralization, are simply not enough for me. When things go really bad, people are not going to be rushing to move all their assets into Bitcoin. They'll move to physical goods. They trade physically in person. And that, for me, tells you everything about Bitcoin's real value in a time of extreme circumstance. Thirdly, Bitcoin is becoming an institutional playground. The same kinds of financial engineering that caused the mortgage crisis in 2008 are creeping into the Bitcoin markets, unfortunately. Look at what companies like MicroStrategy are doing. It's financial gymnastics, and some would even argue that it resembles a Ponzi scheme. I might be wrong in the short term. I do expect Bitcoin to keep going up for a while, and I expect many of you to have a go at me in the comments. But eventually, I believe Bitcoin is only going in one direction, and that's down. Maybe not completely to zero, but as good as, maybe sub-1,000. That's my view.
Bitcoin is one of the best performing assets of the past decade. That alone shows people are treating it as a store of real value, like digital gold, effectively. The physical argument that something must be tangible and you need to be able to see it and hold it for it to be valuable, I don't think that stacks up in today's digital world. Most of your and my bank balances aren't physical. They're just a series of zeros and ones in a computer somewhere. Your pension isn't physical. It's just a series of zeros and ones in a computer somewhere. So folks, in today's digital age, value is based a lot more on consensus, a lot more on legal underpinnings, a lot more around clarity of rules, a lot more around the utility of that thing, not the physical aspect of it. And as for the idea that Bitcoin hasn't stood the test of time, well, that's missing the point. No new asset has ever faced more scrutiny and survived this long than Bitcoin. It has weathered regulatory threats, market crashes, and public skepticism, and still it keeps on growing. And when fiat currencies lose value due to inflation, people increasingly now are turning to Bitcoin. This isn't, some kind of theory. This is already happening in countries like Argentina, Turkey, Nigeria. And in the long run, Bitcoin offers a real alternative to an unstable fiat system. Because historically, we had the US dollar as the default currency that everyone would look to. That's the currency that you would see trade happening in throughout the world. But now, when you have turbulence between the USA and China, the US dollar is not necessarily the most stable of currencies, and people are thinking, should we transact using the US dollar given some of the more erratic behavior that we've seen from people like Donald Trump? In that absence, what do they want to look for? Well, they could look at the Chinese currency, but then there are a lot of issues around that as well, around transparency and the ability to understand how China is printing that currency, or how it's issuing it, inflation, etc., and exposure to the Chinese economy. So this is again where something like Bitcoin provides a really nice neutral alternative that keeps global trade chugging along.
Is Bitcoin even decentralized? This is the final irony. Bitcoin was born as a decentralized movement, but today it's anything but that. A handful of mining pools dominate the network. Institutional players and whales hold large portions of the supply, and increasingly the narrative is being shaped not by people in their bedrooms or open source developers, but actually by corporations and regulators. Even the infrastructure around Bitcoin, exchanges, ETFs, custodians, they're all centralized. And if those off-ramps are cut off, then you're stuck. And let's not pretend you're storing your Bitcoin on paper wallets offline. Most people are not. So if Bitcoin isn't widely used as payment, if it's not a reliable long-term store of value, and it isn't truly decentralized anymore, then what exactly are we left with? It's a speculative asset, one that's increasingly driven by hype, institutions, and financial complexity. But that's a far cry from the revolution that it set out to be.
Bitcoin remains the most decentralized and secure blockchain in the entire world. While some mining pools are large, they cannot change the Bitcoin protocol or steal coins. The network operates on a consensus mechanism that requires broad agreement across thousands of nodes globally. Ownership concentration is an issue, but that's true of almost every major asset, from stocks and shares to real estate to gold. Frankly, even the US dollar and any sovereign currency has an ownership issue. Who is able to print that money? The Fed or the Bank of England? They can unilaterally make those decisions, and that affects the entire supply. There is no control over it, unlike Bitcoin, where there is complete control and visibility over how new Bitcoin can be issued. What matters is that there's no single actor that can rewrite the Bitcoin ledger or freeze accounts or censor transactions. Centralized platforms may dominate the on and off ramps today, but that doesn't mean the asset itself is centralized. Users still have the option to self-custody, run their own nodes, and transact peer-to-peer. I know someone who sells Bitcoin peer-to-peer. That's unregulated and it's perfectly fine. It doesn't need to be regulated in the UK. He does that offline and he is able to send things overseas without anyone else knowing about it. It's literally like living off the grid, but the payment equivalent of that. And there is a time and a place for that, because none of us particularly want the government to be able to see everything that we are doing, not necessarily because we're doing anything wrong, but just on a principled basis. Why is it that the government previously, when we were using cash, was not able to see anything that we were transacting over, but now because we've gone online, the government can literally see everything? And then that data is out there that can be exploited by large corporates as well. Why would we sign up for that? The core infrastructure of Bitcoin remains open source and permissionless as well. And in a world of increasing surveillance and control, Bitcoin is one of the few tools that therefore is empowering people with financial sovereignty. You are in charge of your own finances.
So should you invest in Bitcoin? Look, I don't think either of us won the other person over, and that's okay. It's totally fine for people to have opposing views on investments, and in fact, that happens in markets all the time. In fact, that is what a market is. And that is the opportunity. When you're right whilst others are wrong, that's how you either make a fortune or save a fortune. Sure, you might be able to make money on Bitcoin in the short term. As I said, I do think that there are trading opportunities or short-term opportunities. But if I was to advise my mom on whether she should buy Bitcoin and hold it forever, I think the answer to that is no, because long-term, I just don't see where the value is.
Should you invest in Bitcoin? Look, that depends on whose argument you ultimately found the most convincing. Ultimately, if you understand Bitcoin and think it will do well, then it should be part of your portfolio. If not, then there are a ton of other investment options out there, which you can find out on our channel and on our website as well. For those who do want to invest in Bitcoin, how much of your portfolio should you put in Bitcoin? For me, one of the key considerations when it comes to investing generally is this investment actually going to add real value to the world? And I know that's not always a big concern for everyone, but for me, it is a big concern. And I think for most Muslims, it should be a big concern, because your money is going to have an impact in the world, regardless of whether or not you want it to. And our resources are a way for us to get to Jannah. And if our resources are not working hard enough for us to get us to Jannah, then we should potentially think about other alternatives. So I would want my investments to always be working towards doing real good, rather than just kind of being steady eddies or making a little bit of profit. And I think with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and even gold and all other of these commodity type assets, they are not necessarily intrinsically valuable in the sense that they are adding value to the world. They are just pieces of metal or just digital assets that are sat there, and they aren't really adding any value to the world in a substantive way. Others may disagree, and they argue that having an alternative kind of money is a good store of value intrinsically. And I think relative to gold, Bitcoin, particularly because of all of the things that I've said in this video, Bitcoin can make that argument a lot stronger, that actually it's not just a store of value, it's providing this really powerful way of decoupling financial control from governments to the individual. And I think there is something there, right? So if you find that argument quite persuasive, then you might even want to increase your percentage allocation towards Bitcoin because of the impact aspect of it. So a property puts a roof over someone's head and it gives you that rental yield. It's a really physical, valuable thing. Similarly for stocks and shares. For example, Amazon is a large stock. It gives a massive service to the world. Google provides search to the world, Netflix provides entertainment to the world, and lots of other stocks do very similar things in their particular area. And this is, by the way, not me commenting on the ethics of investing in these companies, it's just making a very clear point that they are providing a clear value to the world. So when you're making a profit and you're giving money into the stock price, that's actually helping that company, either directly or indirectly, in furthering its mission. You're doing something real in this world. With Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and gold and other things like that, it is basically just sat there. It's a store of value, but it's basically just sat there. And it's not actually doing anything intrinsically useful for the world. So my personal view is that I would probably put maybe a maximum of 5% into Bitcoin and gold and things like that. And if it goes up in value, I would trim it down. And if it starts falling in value, I would buy up a little bit more until it comes back up to about 5% of the portfolio. But this kind of investment would never be the sole focus of my investment strategy, because I just think life is too short. You need to have a bit more impact from an investment perspective, regardless of the return story. So what is a good crypto investment strategy? If you want to invest in Bitcoin, this is how you should actually do it. What you should do is look at, firstly, how much money do you have? Are you able to risk all of it or potentially lose all of it and still be happy? If that's you, then whatever amount of money you're completely happy to lose, that's the amount that you can potentially put into Bitcoin. Mars, we need you, right? So you've heard these arguments. I'm saying we need to invest in Bitcoin. He's chatting rubbish. Who do you think won?